Hey Google, Spooky Doll Lady Chris. We're going to be doing a freezer paper stenciling tutorial today. I know I've teased this for like probably 3 or 4 months at this point. I finally managed to get everything together today to do a quick one. I only have one thing that I want to stencil though, so I got a hoodie and I want to put a stencil on the chest with one of my little blockhead skulls and little crossbones. So that's what we're going to do today. I'm going to start by drawing and then cutting out my stencil. Sorry, I have my ironing board over here. It's not normally there, but it takes up a lot of space and I'm going to bump into it a lot. Okay, so first things first. I want to sketch out the little skull. I'm just going to grab a ruler really quick, trying to make sure my lines are relatively straight. I also want to make sure I'm starting far enough from the edge. I'm going to cut this down because this is going to be way too big. Give me just a second here. I think I'll give myself 1.5 inches because I haven't done a big stencil in a while. I want to make sure I give myself room that I'm not going to be going over with my paint. I'll go over the materials in a second too. Just let me get a little area traced out so I can cut the paper and put the excess somewhere off camera where it won't be in my way. Okay. Oops. I think probably that should give me plenty of space if I cut it off here. I want to go 2 inches on the top and bottom because that's where I tend to be the messiest for some reason. Well, maybe I'll do 1.5 inches. I think 1.5 inches is probably enough space. So let me make sure that this is going to be big enough with 1.5 inches marked off. Also, you might notice, yes, I cut my hair yesterday. I'm going to be recoloring it very soon. I finally cut off all of these super over-processed dead pastel ends. It feels so much better and healthier already. Okay, I think, let's see. I just want to make sure. Let me get the cutting board out from under here for a second, because that's, okay. I really should have measured out the area that I wanted to draw this first, but of course I didn't, because I have executive dysfunction and that's not something that occurs to me. Okay, so I'm going to cut. On these lines so that I have a smaller area to work with. Just because I already have just a small area of table to work with. So the less paper that's in the way, the easier it's going to be for me to show you all what I'm doing. So I'm just going to cut this off here. Okay. And then that'll give me another 1.5 inches on this one. Yeah, about 1.5 inches on this side. Just mark that off so I know exactly how big my drawing area is going to be. Now I can draw in this whole area and I have all of these extra areas so that when I'm sponging the paint on, I can not have to worry that I'm going to go over and end up with paint outside of my stencil. Okay, so just set that under there. This is the most frustrating part about freezer paper stencils, honestly, is just that this paper, especially when you get to the end of the roll, and I'm coming to the end of my roll, it's rolled real tightly and it just wants to stay rolled. And you kind of have to tape it down because otherwise it will just roll itself up as you're working. And obviously you can't iron it flat because you can't iron it until you're putting it on the garment. All right. So basically the supplies, where did I put my paper, that you're going to need, you need your freezer paper first and foremost. This is a gigantic thing. It's hard to get in either of my cameras. It's quite wide, which comes in handy. And it just comes on a big roll, and normally it has a cutting edge and you can cut it, but my box is several years old at this point because I don't use it as frequently as I used to, and it's collapsed to the point where when I try to use the cutting edge, it just folds over. So yeah, I have to cut mine by hand, but normally you don't have to do that. You can just tear off a nice big sheet, cut it down to size, and then all of these little pieces you cut off, if you end up deciding that you want more protection on the edges of your stencil, you can always iron them over it like that, and they'll also stick to both the paper and your fabric so that you have extra protection. So I never throw those away because sometimes you just want a little extra guard. Okay, so you need that. You need a cutting surface, an X-Acto. You need sponge brushes. If you have the round stamper style of brush, those are kind of better. I don't know what I did with mine, so I just grabbed a few different sizes of sponge brushes that I have. I have a little hole punch handy because I'm going to be using that for something later when I cut this stuff out. Scissors, kind of, if you want to cut your paper down to size, obviously pencil. You can also, if you have an inkjet printer, you can print directly onto your freezer paper and cut out that way. Let's see. Oh, also you need an iron and an ironing board, and fabric, and that's pretty much it. You can use acrylic paint, you can use fabric paint. I don't know why I have two that are open again. I have untreated ADHD. It's a problem. But it's this folk art brand that I think is honestly like the softest. It doesn't have like a texture to it. Unless you put it on in like several layers. It sinks into the fabric really nicely, so you don't get like a stiff print that's going to crack over time. So this one I like. This is my favorite for black. It's not as great in the lighter colors because you do have to use a lot of coats and it starts to get like a rubbery feel to it, which again, it doesn't crack over time, so that's kind of awesome. But it also bleeds through the fabric a lot, so you do need, I got newspaper over here that I'm going to be putting under my fabric. I think that's it. Stuff to draw, stuff to paint, stuff to apply the paint, close. Okay, I think that's all the materials. Alright, so I'm going to draw one of my little blockhead skulls and some little crossbones for my new hoodie. I don't want to make it that big, so let's, yeah, about that size. And let me see what 2 inches is going to look like. Hold on. I'll line this back up so I can make sure I'm drawing the bottom basically the same size here. I think that's going to be a little big, so let's try and shrink my skull by about 1/4 of an inch at a time until I get it where I'm happy with it. And that's actually probably going to be fine. So this is my favorite mechanical pencil because it has a retractable and refillable eraser as well as the leads, which is awesome. So let's get rid of that. And if you're wondering why I'm drawing lines for a skull, that's because my blockhead skulls are angular. They are blocky, that's why they're blockhead skulls. And it doesn't really have to be centered on your stencil, but if you center your drawing on your stencil, that's going to help you get your placement better once you're ironing it on. Alright, so this is also a little glimpse into how I draw my little skulls on the occasions that I draw them. Although I might be drawing them more frequently because I bought myself a drawing tablet. I found one on Facebook Marketplace for $15 with like $5 shipping. So it's already on its way. It's supposed to be here this weekend. So I'm kind of looking forward to playing around with that and seeing what I can do with it. Oops. Alright, this is gonna aggravate me. So let me just have this super cheap packing tape over here. Because I ran out of Scotch tape. So let me just get some of the stickiness off so it doesn't damage the freezer paper. And then I'm going to tape this paper down so it stops trying to roll up on me. Alright. Stop it! Okay. Actually, let me tape all four corners here. Yeah, see, now it's gonna hold that down better. Otherwise, this gets very frustrating. I usually have it taped down when I'm drawing on it anyway because I don't usually draw directly onto it. I usually like to draw first and then trace from underneath by putting a light source under my paper. I have well, you probably can't see it very well because it's covered with stuff lately, but I have a glass top drawing table back there, and I usually, when I do stencils, will tape both the paper that I'm drawing to and my freezer paper to the glass tabletop, and then put a light source under the table and trace that way. And you do want to be really careful when you draw on here. You have to erase very lightly because you don't want to erode the paper, especially around where you're going to be cutting. You need the paper to be as intact as possible so that it will block out the paint. Okay, I feel like this is almost a little too square. My blockhead skulls are usually a little bit more rectangular. So I'm going to bring it out by 1/4 of an inch. Oops. All right, and then round these corners. You also don't have to completely erase your sketched lines because obviously the pencil isn't going to transfer onto your fabric, and you're going to be painting over it anyway. So you just need to erase enough that you know which lines are going to be cut and which ones are going to be left alone. Carve in this corner just a little bit further so it matches with the other side. But I'm not super concerned about it being perfectly symmetrical. I do want my lines nice and straight just because it's a lot easier to cut a really straight line. But yeah, I'm not really super concerned about the skull itself being really symmetrical. because that's kind of a whole thing with my blockheads, is that they are perfectly imperfect and they're not exactly symmetrical. I do want to find roughly the middle here though, so I can get my teeth placed generally in the right place. 2 3/4, so 1 3/8. It's going to be here. Select line. Okay. So I'm going to put a tooth here. Tooth here. Maybe bring those just a little bit closer together. That was big enough. I feel like I could make the teeth bigger. I haven't drawn one of my little skulls by hand in kind of a while. So let's do a little bit of a bigger tooth. Okay. And 3, 4. Oh boy, those are not centered. I think it's okay though. I'm not going to mess with it too much. I think I actually needed to be over this way a little bit more. So I am going to move the nose over a bit. And I do a nose for a skull. I just do sort of an upside down heart. Like that. Alright, and the eyes are buttons. So I wanted to find something round to trace. And my buttons, I'm not sure where they actually are. Whoops. Bumping my camera. But I did find my googly eyes. So to trace out the eye circles, I'm going to be using some googly eyes. And I always like to do one bigger than the other. I just think it looks kind of fun that way. This is not a very clean edge on this eye though. So let me grab a different one. Yeah, these ones are even a little bit bigger. So I'm going to use one of those. Okay. Trace these out for the eyes. Here's one. There's 2. All right. And I'm going to do little buttonholes. This is why I have this, so that I can do little punched out buttonholes. I actually have one that's even smaller than this, but I'm not sure what I did with it, unfortunately. Unless it's in my drawers behind me. That's the big one. I think I put it over here. So, alright, that's fine. They just won't come out as cleanly. Should still be okay though. Alright, so I draw little circles for buttonholes. And then bigger circles for buttonholes. And I'm going to punch those ones out with my little hole puncher. Alright, and then the crossbones. Let me actually get this centered. Okay, I feel like that was centered. It just looks off for some reason. So, just because the crossbones do need to be a little bit more symmetrical. Let's see, how am I going to do this? I'm going to just draw the middle line and draw the bones around the middle lines. Just trying to line up the, I don't know if you can see from my camera. I'm hesitant to tilt my camera too much because it likes to freeze when I do that. But I'm just lining up the lines on a diagonal through the little squares so that I can know that they're at least going in the right direction. I'm going to draw them by hand though because I don't care if they're perfect or not. I just want to make sure that they're going the right way, you know? That the angles aren't wonky. Alright, so there's one. And I need to erase the middle lines, but I think this eraser might be too thick to get in there now. So I'm going to grab my little mono zero guy over here. Again, you don't have to erase them perfectly. I just need to erase enough that I don't accidentally cut the wrong thing when I start cutting this out. Which you can do if you leave too many lines on your paper. I have definitely done that before. Okay, so I want to make them thicker than that. No, I think that's probably good. Yeah. I keep looking at the skull and I feel like it's too small, but it is just going like on the chest of a hoodie, so I don't want to make it enormous. Just not happy with it for some reason. I'm not sure why. First of all, this tooth is too big. I know I need to be less obsessive about this because other people aren't going to stare at it the way I do. Other people will just look at it and go, oh, that's a cool hoodie. And then I can go, yeah, that's my skull. I drew that. My blockhead design. Alright. Now that I moved the teeth, I see that they definitely were centered, and my nose is off center now. So I'm going to move that over. I just have to make this difficult for myself. All right. I'm gonna add more to the sides. I feel like that's the issue, is that it just feels too square still. So I'm gonna just extend both sides out a little bit farther. Maybe that'll make it feel better. I also don't normally use a ruler. I don't know why I thought that that would be better this time. But I don't know if maybe that's making me feel like it's off, because usually I hand draw them, and I feel like that's half of the charm, is that they're not really perfect. So let me just see if I like this better now. Yeah, I already feel like that's better. Okay. It was just still feeling too square. This might end up being a very large print to put on the area that it's going, but whatever. Go big or go home, right? Next. Oops, I keep bumping my camera. I'm sorry. Not trying to give anybody motion sickness or anything. I'm just not used to having quite such a cramped space to work in, because my ironing board is directly to my right, which means that my ring light is, instead of being on my right, directly behind the camera on my left. So I can't really move my arms too much in either direction, or I'm going to knock into things. Okay. All right, I'm pretty happy with my stencil, so I'm going to cut this out. I'm going to stop looking at it because I'm going to find things I don't like about it. Okay, so the way that I like to cut this is I will cut all of the pieces that are going to create islands. Well, let me start with this one, because this isn't going to make an island. This is all going to come up. You always want to take your time and go really slow around curves, because if you end up with a choppy curve, with a choppy cut on your curve rather, you're going to end up with a really choppy edge on your stencil, and it will be kind of visible in your final print. So you don't want to do that. All right, so there's that bit of the bone. I'm going to cut this a little bit. And if you cut these carefully enough, you can actually use them to do a relief print. But I'm not really worried about that today. I just want to get these cut so I can print my new hoodie and then be done. Okay, there's half of it up. Get the other half of the bones. This is just a good example of why taping your paper down definitely is helpful, because if I were having to worry about my paper coming up while I'm cutting on all these curves, it would be kind of a nightmare. All right, one more little section of bone, and then the first part will be ready to go. All right. So if I now wanted to use this to do a relief, I could iron this part down and stamp the paint on my sponge brush over this, and then when I peel it off, I'll have a paint splotch with the bones, the crossed bones being the unpainted area. Which, if I get this one out nice and clean too, I may just use these again and do a separate tutorial on doing relief stenciling. But okay, so I do want to move my camera really quick so that I can kind of be right under it. So with this, obviously, you're going to want to take the skull out, but you're going to want the buttons and the nose to still be there. Those are called islands, because obviously when you peel this middle part out of your stencil here, they're going to be floating. And with typical stenciling, islands have to be attached somehow. Because otherwise there's nothing for them to hold on to. With freezer paper stenciling, this is really the biggest benefit to using freezer paper to make your stencils, is that you can have floating islands. Because it's getting ironed on, your islands will also be ironed down and they will stick. So you can have those floating areas that will also be blocked out and protected from the paint. So the way that I usually like to do islands, now I'm realizing why this looked lopsided, is because this tooth is too far over. So just before I cut it out, I'm gonna move it over a bit. Okay. And I think that's also going to help it look more symmetrical. All right, I keep starting this sentence and not finishing it. But the way that I usually handle islands on these stencils is I will cut them out like 99.9% of the way and just leave a teeny tiny little piece that I can just kind of very lightly slide the X-Acto over after I've ironed it down. You have to do it very carefully so you don't cut your fabric, but I find that the easiest way to get my islands not to move around. And I am going to show exactly what I mean by that. I don't know that I would recommend to do it that way if you are not kind of experienced with this. There's really no reason to do it that way other than to save yourself the time of repositioning the islands, which you potentially might have to do otherwise. Um, but because I like to make things difficult on myself, that's just how I do it. All right, so this is going to be the main blocked out stencil part. I'm going to move this for a second just so I can get really focused on these bits. So what I mean by leaving a little bit of the island uncut is I'm going to cut around this nose. Just making sure I'm on my camera here. I'd never like to leave that uncut bit on a curve because it's just too easy to end up with a really wonky area on your curve by doing that. So I'm going to make sure that the curve is totally free. And then this is cut all the way up to the point. So what I'm going to do is cut just below the point and all the way down to the curve. And can you see how small that uncut area is right there? Now, when I iron it down, I'm just going to take my X-Acto and go very lightly over that until this piece detaches from the nose. I don't know if I'm explaining that in a way that makes sense. I hope I am, because I don't think I'm going to be able to move my camera enough to be able to show as I'm ironing what I mean. But anyway, you don't have to do that. You can always cut it completely out. I'll do that with one of the eyes just to show that there's really, it doesn't make a huge difference, except that you save yourself time on potentially having to reposition. All right, so I'm going to take this eye completely out. Let me see. Yeah, these are going to be much smaller holes than my hole puncher can do. So I think the easiest way is just going to be to really carefully cut them with the X-Acto. And you don't have to worry about preserving these because the island is the button itself. These little holes are going to be filled with the paint. So these are all painted areas that are getting removed. Obviously, I could worry about it for the second part with the relief painting, but I'm not going to today. Just because they're so small that if I try to do that, I'm going to drive myself nuts. All right, one more. This is honestly the longest part is drawing and cutting the stencil. The actual painting takes like no time at all. It's super fast. And you get a really nice clean print out of it. So it's pretty cool. All right, I'm going to use my little hole punch really quick. Oh, I may have to move these up. I don't know if I can get it on camera. See how it's slightly below it? I don't want to crease this too badly, so I'm going to cut right above that instead. And put the second one right there. Okay, so now I have nice clean holes that I don't have to worry about trying to cut around. How about that? Okay, so I'm going to cut this one out. Okay, so I put all of these pieces with the stencil over here for now. Put this away. All right. Now, if I had my mannequin out here, I would put this on my mannequin to do this, but I don't. So I'm going to put the hoodie on really quick. And then put the stencil on it and mark with a heat erase pencil where I want the stencil placement. All right. So I want this. I think yeah. My neck is kind of in the way here. Hey, is that Tracy? You're catching me right at an awkward part. Okay, so I'm just marking where, so now I don't know if I can get on my camera. I just marked the little edges of that with a heat erase pen so that I can take this off, pop it up on the ironing board, and then let me try and move this without making it freeze. Oh, good, it worked. Okay. You got the best time. Okay, so now I'm going to take that and line it up. I want to line it up both with the hoodie and with my markings as much as possible. So I can see that my markings were obviously a little crooked because the garment was on a body. So it's also, as I was just saying, important to line it up with the edges of the garment as well so that it looks proper, I guess. Let me just get my iron to warm itself back up. It turned itself off because it wasn't being used. I just want to iron this down just enough that it won't move, and then I will start putting the other pieces back on it. Let me give it another second to warm up. I will be peeling the tape off before I iron too, because you don't want to iron tape. All right. So let me turn this so that my face cam still has me too. All right, this is as close as I can get. My camera doesn't like to focus unless I'm like right in it, but that's the best I can do right now. I'm actually going to move this down just a little bit because I feel like it might be a bit high. It's really close to the shoulder. So I'm going to move it even a little bit lower. Just because I think that that's probably going to be a less awkward position for it. And I'm lining the edge up along the zipper. Press it down a little bit, and I folded it over, but that's okay because it will fold itself back. All right, I've got it down just enough that it's not going to move. So I'm going to take the little bits of tape off because obviously you don't want to iron tape onto your clothes. That's going to make a mess. So that is damaging the paper, so I will probably take one of my scraps and just put an extra little guard in that corner. It's probably more area than I need to be guarded, but I think it's probably okay. Oh, and you always want to make sure your iron is on a setting that is safe for the garment. I don't like to go above the polyester setting just because I find that that will sometimes melt the stencil in a way that will leave a lasting mark on the clothes, and you obviously don't want that. All right, so just really quick, I'm gonna put this back on and make sure that I'm still happy with where it's sitting. Again, if I had my mannequin out here, I would put it on a mannequin instead of on my body because it's easier that way, but I don't. All right, so yeah, I'm still happy with where that's sitting. I think it still looks okay. It's not sitting crooked or anything. So I'm going to carefully take this off. it back up on the ironing board. And we're going to start to set it more permanently. So I just go a few seconds at a time. I don't like to go more than that because you never want to accidentally damage your clothes or melt the stencil too far. It really just needs to be like just stuck. So go a few more seconds. And just like ironing clothes, you never want to let your iron sit. You always move your iron. Anytime there is an iron on fabric, it should always be moving. All right. This little corner here got folded and this one got tucked under, so I'm going to fix these corners really quick. And obviously you always want to pre-test your fabric against your iron. Okay, no problem, Tracy. This will be on YouTube later. Okay, so here's what I was talking about with, I'm going to take this nose piece off after I get it in place. So I'm going to give that just a few seconds, just enough that it is only just set on there. And then I'm going to get the eyes. So this is how you place them if you don't leave them set. Is that you would kind of iron your piece that's getting peeled up as a guide. Then you press your islands into place. If they're still attached, you will lightly take your X-Acto and just kind of tap on that area until it comes loose. All right, so that is now freed. I'm going to press that nose bit down really well. Okay, and then you just peel up the bit you're removing. Your islands are still in place. Press those again for another few seconds. Make sure they're really stuck on the edges. You don't need your stencil to be like perfectly stuck all the way out, but it does need to be really good and stuck on the edges. So I just like to kind of run, it's getting real hot. Just kind of run my fingers along and see if there's any areas that feel like they need a little extra attention with the iron. And just press those areas down really good. All right, and I think this is probably okay now. Another way you can check is to just kind of like wave the fabric around, if that makes sense. And if you see anything that's sticking up, that obviously needs to be hit with the iron again really quick. And if you have any areas that just won't stick down for whatever reason, don't damage the fabric trying to get them to stick. You can just be extra careful when you're painting, and generally those areas will still turn out okay. All right, so let me move everything out of my work area really quick because we're going to be painting now. I'm going to turn my iron off. I'm going to grab my newspaper. And if you're putting newspaper underneath, it's always good to make sure that there are no creases or folds or like the edges of the pages here directly under where you're going to be painting, because those will leave like a texture kind of a look to it. Like if there's a fold in the paper underneath, you'll get a crease in your paint. So you don't want to do that, obviously. All right, turn everything back here. Oh boy, I have not done this on a garment of my own in a while. It's kind of exciting. All right. I don't know. Both of these feel relatively full, so I think at least one of those must be good. And you want to use a brush that's not going to be like, this could work for this because, you know, you can get most of it in one go. You don't want to use a brush that's like obnoxiously big. So if I were doing something that were like this size, for example, if I used a brush this big, this would be really, really obnoxious, really easy to make a mess. Because the thing that you're going to focus on now as you're stamping your paint on is that you want to stamp straight up and down. You never want to pull towards any direction because that's how you get paint going underneath the stencil. So the bigger the brush, the more chances that you're going to accidentally pull your paint instead of stamping. So yeah, with things this size, normally I wouldn't use a brush bigger than this because you can just stamp right up and down and you have much less chance that you're going to accidentally pull your paint in any direction and get it under the stencil. With this size, you could go with the big brush and you'd probably be fine. You could also do the small brush. This would be okay. It's really, I'm going to go with the middle-sized brush just for both because I think that this is going to be a good way to do this quickly and easily. All right, so one more thing I want to mention. If you want to get like a distressed look where you don't want it fully saturated with the paint, I'm going to recommend that you put your paint onto like a plate or a palette or some kind of surface and just take tiny little bits of paint and then even like dab it off, you know, off of your work surface, not somewhere where you're going to smudge, but just dab some of it off before you start sponging. Because once the paint soaks into the sponge brush, it's going to be saturated whether you want it to or not. So I want a nice saturated paint, so I'm going to put it right directly onto the end of my brush. Okay. I'm just going to give it a second to kind of run because this is a good thick paint. Okay, so I'm just going to start stamping straight up and down. And I like to give myself a good amount of room, not just because of the stamping, because if you're careful, you can keep your stamping really well contained, but also just because of potential splashing, which generally in the beginning and with a small design like this isn't a major issue, but just out of habit, I do a wider border because I'm used to doing like full-size t-shirt graphics when I do stenciling. And the brush can get really saturated really quickly, and then you end up with like occasional splatters that'll end up around the area. They generally don't travel more than an inch or two, but I just find that it's a good idea to protect the whole area. And you can layer on as much of this as you want, but I'm going to recommend that you just do enough that you can't see the garment color or the fabric color if you're not printing on a garment, that you can't see the fabric color underneath the paint. Oh, well, there goes one of my one of my things of paint. If you saturate it too much, you can also have issues with the paint bleeding around your stencil. And of course, because I'm doing this on stream, I'm sure I'm going to have some issues just because I'm trying to do a tutorial. I'm sure other artists all know how that goes, that the second you try to show somebody else how to do something, you start making mistakes that you don't normally make. But, you know, I've done this for years. I ran a custom t-shirt business for a while, pretty much only using this method. And I got all kinds of compliments from people who did not realize that they were hand-cut stencils because my lines were so crisp and clean and everything was so nicely saturated. that they were sure I was like using a printing company. And there's no printing company, it's just me. Okay, this is where using the big brush might have been a little bit too much. Just trying to get these chunks out of here. My paint is a little bit old, as you might be able to tell. It's okay. It's still going to be fine, and honestly, I could leave those and it's not going to damage anything. I'll just pick them off once the paint dries. I just want them out of that little small area so that I can actually see if I'm missing any parts. Like this little corner here. I totally missed that corner. Okay, and I think that's probably going to do it. Okay, now the difference between stenciling and just straight up painting on fabric is, let me move my brush really quick. I'm gonna put that down where it's not going to touch any fabric it shouldn't be touching. So with straight up painting on fabric, you obviously don't want to touch it until the paint dries. With stenciling, the longer you leave it, the more chance there is that the paint is going to bleed under your stencil. So what you actually want to do is remove your stencil pretty much as soon as that paint is on there. So now that it's painted, I'm just going to peel it straight off. There. And, oh no, where do I put it? I don't have anywhere to put it. Oh God. I put it way over here on the table. There we go. Okay. I usually have an extra thing of newspaper to put my brushes and stencils on after I peel them. So now you can see those really nice crisp lines. And I gotta peel these. This is the hardest part. I hate this so much. So much. I may actually get a pin first just to start this. And kind of try and not get the fabric and not push any paint under there, but just lift a corner so that I can take my tweezers and grab that. Oh, that was perfect. Oh, beautiful. All right. And then just clean off the paint. Let me get a napkin so I can clean this really, really well. Make sure your tweezers are clean and that your needle is clean, or your pin or whatever you're using. All right. Just lift that corner so you can grab it, peel it straight off. All right. There's another piece off. Okay, one more left to go. Okay, yeah, there's no good edge here either, which is a good thing. That means my stencil was pressed down enough. I'm just gonna go again and lift that little edge. Clean my pin, put my pin away. Okay, I'm gonna grab and just, oh no, I dropped it. Oh, I didn't lift enough. I keep dropping it. Okay, there we go. Lift it straight off. Woo! Let's pretend I got that in one go. All right. And again, because that comes off nice and clean and you don't wait for the paint to bleed anywhere, you get those nice clean lines. Okay? And just for fun, I'm going to go and pick off all of these little clumpy bits. Normally, this fabric paint does not have those clumpy bits. It's just that those particular bottles have been sitting for probably a couple of years, if I'm being honest. I don't think I've touched them since our lockdown started, so yeah, that would have been a couple of years. And obviously all paints have a shelf life, fabric paint included. So I think that those paints are probably just nearing the end of their shelf life. Okay. So I'm just grabbing the little clumps. All right. And now all that's left to do is to let your paint dry. If you lift it up, you can see that even on like a nice thick hoodie fabric, it does bleed a bit. So this is why the newspaper is always a good idea. And why you generally don't want to move the fabric around too much until it's dry, because the bits that bleed from here, if the paint on the newspaper is wet, can transfer to the inside of the fabric. But I have to move this because I don't have any work area if I don't move it. So I'm going to just carefully pick this up and put it over here. Okay, so that's that. That was a super short stream, actually. It was only an hour. So what I think I might do is stop and clean up my work area, get this started uploading on YouTube, and then I might come back and do another short stream doing something else because I do have other projects that I could do. I have a couple of doll faces I'm still working on, or I could start sculpting my first art doll head. I don't know. Let me clean up my area. Give me like 15 minutes. Anybody who's lurking in the chat, I'll be back in about 15 minutes. I'm going to end this stream, but I will come back. So just, hang around for a bit. All right. If you're watching this on YouTube, do the whole like and subscribe thing and everything. Thanks for watching. I hope you found this helpful. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments and I will do my best to answer them. I do plan on doing other freezer paper tutorials. This was just like the first of many, because this was a project I wanted to do for myself anyway. Yeah, okay. So thanks for watching. I will see you in the next one. Bye.